What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this past Friday we got the new Star Wars video game Jedi Survivor, and of course, since I'm making this video, I've obviously played it and I want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's rock. Jedi Survivor is a sequel to the 2019 game Fallen Order, which I enjoyed when it first came out. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I do a weekly podcast called The Nerd You're Looking For, which is a not so subtle reference to one of the more famous lines in Star Wars. So obviously I'm a pretty big fan. I played the first game when it came out and I enjoyed it for the most part. However, it felt like Fallen Order had a bit of an identity crisis. It felt like the developers cut and pasted a lot of elements from other games and then didn't really blend them well together. However, at the end of the day, I really enjoyed that game. It had a lot of cool boss fights. The last hour of Fallen Order was spectacular. Therefore, I was really excited for the sequel. That sequel, of course, is Jedi Survivor, which, like I said earlier, was released this past Friday, April 28th. It was developed by Respawn and published by EA. It was released on PS5, Xbox Series S and X, and PC. I personally played it on PS5. I played it for roughly 21 hours. Of course, that includes me beating the story, which I always do for reviews. And then I also did some side stuff, not as much as I normally would have if I was playing this independently of the review, but I like to get out these reviews as quickly as possible, so I didn't do as much side stuff as I normally would have, but I do plan on going back and doing some more side stuff before Tears of the Kingdom is released in a few weeks. And honestly, I considered getting this game on PC. I played the original Fallen Order on my PC when it first came out. However, I am ultimately glad, despite some issues that we're going to talk about later on the PS5 version of this game, I am glad that I didn't get the PC version because it sounds like the PC port is basically unplayable at this point. SkillUp tweeted about this, who is kind of my go-to for PC gaming stuff on YouTube, and he said despite having a high-end gaming PC, Jedi Survivor is basically unplayable on that platform right now. I'm sure that they're actively working on fixing these issues. However, if you're considering getting this on PC, I would definitely wait a minute. Now that we've gotten that unpleasantness out of the way, I will say that Jedi Survivor does the thing that I want all sequels to do. Take what worked in the first game, fine-tune what you can fine-tune, and there's definitely, as I was saying earlier, stuff that could be fine-tuned in Fallen Order. Add what you can add, but you don't want to lose the heart of the original game, and I do think that Jedi Survivor found that gray area really well. Speaking of the first game, the story of Fallen Order was definitely a standout. Therefore, if you haven't played Jedi Fallen Order, I would strongly suggest it. Not only is it a great game, but also Jedi Survivor leans heavily on the story from the first game, more than I think most sequels do. It definitely relies on the great character work from the first game. I especially enjoyed Cal and Marin's relationship in Jedi Survivor. So if you haven't played the first game, not only are you going to be behind the 8 ball with the general plot, but you're not going to connect with the characters as much as I did. I will say that some hardcore Star Wars fans may be disappointed with Survivor's story. It doesn't really connect much with the main Star Wars timeline like the first game did, especially once you get out of the first hour or two. Jedi Survivor kind of does its own thing as far as the story is concerned. Cal and crew are just kind of doing their own adventure, and it doesn't really connect with the main Star Wars timeline, which I personally enjoyed. I've grown to really care about these characters, and as much as I love Star Wars, one great thing about the universe is it's so big, and you could tell really interesting stories that don't necessarily need to connect to the Skywalker saga to be interesting. I will mention real quick, I won't spoil anything, so don't get worried, but I did find it really interesting the way this game ended. All I'll say without spoiling anything is that most sci-fi or action adventure games end with you running out of a spaceship before it crumbles behind you. Jedi Survivor does not end like that. It was very surprising, but I was pleasantly surprised because it kind of ended with more of an emotional, character-driven ending. It's gonna rub some people the wrong way, but I absolutely loved it. I'm thinking about this game's story more than I expected to after I was done with it. And like I said earlier, Jedi Survivor does the thing that I'm looking for sequels to do, which is take what worked in the first game. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of really cool ideas in Fallen Order that they took from other games. They kind of borrowed things from a lot of different genres, and they were fun, but a lot of times they weren't really blended together. A lot of times it felt like you were playing different games at points during Fallen Order. So Jedi Survivor definitely blended those elements together, fine-tuned them where they could fine-tune them, but also they turned the gameplay up to 11. Don't get me wrong, the core gameplay of Fallen Order, of planet hopping, jumping in the Mantis while Grease yells at you to take a seat, that's all still here in Jedi Survivor. And for a majority of those planets, when you go there to do a particular story mission, as long as you're paying attention and you explore a little bit, you're pretty much gonna hit everything that that planet has to offer. But where Jedi Survivor distinguishes itself from Fallen Order is its open world planet Koboh, which kind of serves as the main hub of the game. Your hideout is there. There's also a cantina there, which as a huge Star Wars fan, I loved hanging out in the cantina. There's also a shop to buy things on Koboh, but the biggest thing is Jedi Survivor definitely does the open world thing where there's gonna be a bunch of people, especially on Koboh, that you're gonna run into that of course are gonna want your help. And there's just a ton of side missions to do, and there's a lot to explore. And exploring actually matters in Jedi Survivor versus the first game. There isn't just stupid ponchos to collect. There's a ton of character customization options. You can change your outfit, even change the color of your outfit, which doesn't sound like much, but I thought was really cool. There's some BD and lightsaber customization. There's also haircut and facial hair stuff that you can find. I personally went with the Mohawk Fu Manchu combination, and I loved it. The Souls-like combat of parrying and dodging is still very much here in Jedi Survivor. They did add stances, which each stance has, of course, its own advantages and disadvantages, depending on the situation and your style of play. However, I didn't find myself changing my stance all that much. I found two that I liked and kind of stuck with them the rest of the game. To be 100% honest with you, once I got the blaster stance, I basically stuck with that most of the game. I really liked using the blaster to thin out weaker enemies and kind of disrupt larger enemies. There are some really cool finishers, especially with the blaster stance, that I really enjoyed. There are a ton of stances. However, you only have access to two at a time, and you switch back and forth between those two as much as you want. However, in order to actually change the two stances that you have selected, you can only do that at meditation spots. Yes, there are still meditation spots in Jedi Survivor. If you played the original game, you know what I mean. But if you've played a Soulsborne, it's very similar to a campfire where you interact with that meditation spot. If you were to die, you respawn at the last meditation spot. So it works very similar to a Soulsborne game. I will say it does seem like there was a lot more shortcuts available in Jedi Survivor versus the first game, so there wasn't as much backtracking when you did die, which I definitely appreciated. And that kind of leads me into the next big addition to this game versus Fallen Order. There's fast travel in Jedi Survivor. Hallelujah. That's literally taking the worst part of the original game and immediately fixing it in the sequel. It was literally the most annoying thing from Fallen Order. I could not believe that I was playing a game like Fallen Order in 2019 that didn't have fast travel. I was just so annoyed. I wasted so much time just backtracking in that game that I'm so glad that they put fast travel in Jedi Survivor. Not only for the obvious reasons, but also because you do return to a lot of these planets as you progress in the story. So a lot of times, if I was visiting a planet for the first time, I would explore a ton the first time, and then the next time I would just kind of jump to the objective, which just makes this game a lot more efficient than Fallen Order. They also added mounts to Jedi Survivor, which make getting around in this bigger world a lot easier. I definitely appreciate the developers went out of their way to make some really cool quality of life improvements in the sequel. However, those improvements came at a cost, especially the boss battles. They did not feel as memorable in Jedi Survivor versus Fallen Order. Outside of the Rancor, oh, I think I got him. I think I got him. Oh my God, that took so long. It took so long that the game was literally asking me if I wanted to change the difficulty. Let's come over here.
Right on his doorstep.
I want to teabag him. Can I teabag him? How did my Jedi balls taste, Rancor? It only took me literally 100 times to beat you.
Let's see.
But now I'm gonna talk shit. It honestly only took me a few attempts for pretty much every boss in this game, which I know sounds like a brag. I promise you it isn't. I'm not good at these types of games, so if I'm blazing through a game like this, it's probably a tad bit too easy. Now, I did play this on Jedi Knight difficulty, and from what I understand, that's kind of the normal difficulty, which is typically how I play my first playthrough for any game, and if I want to replay it, a lot of times I'll pick a higher difficulty, especially on New Game Plus. So that's typically how I play games, but I thought that this was a tad bit easier than Fallen Order. And while I may not be good at Soulsborne-like combat, I grew up on platformers, and not to brag, I'm pretty good at them. They're easily my favorite genre, and Jedi Survivor is a very good platformer. I love how they give Cal more abilities as you progress in the game, which allows the game to feel fresh, even like 10, 15, 20 hours in. There's even a pseudo boss fight with Cal and Marin that is essentially just a really fun platforming section. Speaking of new abilities, I definitely appreciated that Jedi Survivor didn't do the typical sequel thing where they completely nerf the main character. I understand why they do it. They don't want you to be a complete badass and just run through the entire game with all these great abilities, so they kind of want to slow play it. But in sequels, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially in this game. It wouldn't really make sense to take Force abilities away from Cal. So I definitely appreciated that you're not quite the badass you are, obviously, at the end of this game, but you still are a badass. That being said, there are still a lot of skills to unlock in Jedi Survivor. If you've played the most recent God of War games, the skill tree in Jedi Survivor feels very much cut and paste from those games. There is, however, skill trees for each individual stances, so there's a lot to unlock in this game. And at this point in the review, you're probably thinking, this game sounds great, 5 stars. Not so fast. Unfortunately, we still haven't talked about performance. I touched on this a little bit earlier when I talked about how this game is basically unplayable on PC. They are aware of that situation, and I'm sure they're actively working on fixing it. However, like I said earlier, I played this on PS5, and despite being playable and obviously being better than PC, I still had some issues. Even on PS5, this game feels undercooked. I feel like I say this a lot in reviews, but Jedi Survivor definitely could have used like 6 more months to iron some stuff out. My biggest issue and the most distracting thing that I came across, outside of like little glitches here and there, is anytime this game went from gameplay to cutscene, it would stutter every single time. But even when the game got to the cutscene, it wasn't always perfect. There's a moment later on in the game where Cal gets swiped with a lightsaber and he's kind of rolling on the ground and he's got the lightsaber burn across his chest. But the mark isn't moving while Cal is moving, and it looks so goofy. And of course, you're still getting the weird glitches you see in a lot of open world games. To give them credit, It does feel a lot less glitchy than I remember Fallen Order being on PC when it first came out, but the glitches are still there. And don't get me wrong, I don't think this game necessarily looks bad or plays bad. It's just not quite as polished as I would have thought, given that it was made by Respawn and published by EA. So they obviously put a lot of time and effort into this game. So it's not quite as polished as I would have imagined it was going to be. And I do kind of feel weird nitpicking some of these things because on PS5, the game certainly plays a lot better than PC does. It sounds like, again, the PC port is basically unplayable at this point. And I'm sure, I know for a fact that they're actively working on these issues, especially the PC port. They've already come out with an official statement talking about how disappointed they are with the PC port, and then they're working on fixing it. So I'm sure the game will be better months from now. But I'm not reviewing the game months from now. I'm reviewing the game now. And unfortunately, we in 2023 are at a point with game development where this is going to kind of be the norm. They're going to put out a game that's 80 to 90% ready, and then they're going to actively work to fix the things that aren't ready using the money that people spent on the game that was only 80 to 90% ready. Therefore, in good conscience, I can't give it the high star rating I feel like the story and platforming deserved. This is a really fun, good Star Wars game that told its own story. It didn't weigh itself down with weaving main Star Wars timeline stuff into its story. But unfortunately, it was just bogged down by performance issues. It sounds like it's unplayable on PC, and it just runs okay on PS5. Therefore, I feel like I can only give it 3.5 stars. However, I do feel like once a few things are touched up in the PS5 version, I could easily be talked into 4.5 stars for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. But as always, those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Jedi Survivor in the comments down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, smash that like button, as the kids say. Consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, ding that bell. I put out weekly gaming related content, so if you want to be notified every time I post a video, make sure that you're subscribed and ding that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy. And we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?